Good afternoon, everyone. Good afternoon. Thanks. My name's Jim Ryan, and I'm the Dean of the Harvard Graduate School of Education, and it's my pleasure to welcome you to this afternoon's Askwith Forum. This forum is the third event in our year-long faculty series around fulfilling the promise of diversity. This series began at orientation with a lecture by Professor Sarah Lawrence Lightfoot, and it was my privilege to lead the second session early last month. After tonight, we have 5 more faculty participants. Karen Mapp is next up. Her session has been scheduled for Thursday, November 5th. In the spring, we will welcome Andres Alonso, Mira Levinson, Daniel Allen, who's a professor of government here at Harvard, also the director of the Safra Center for Ethics, and a newly appointed professor of education here at HGSE. Bob Keegan and Lisa Leahy will jointly lead the final event in the series for the year. This faculty series is one component of our community-wide conversation on fulfilling the promise of diversity. There are many other events and activities. Many of you have probably seen the regular newsletter. If you're interested in keeping up with other events, there is a web page. I will give you the site. It's bit.ly, bit.ly /HGSE /FPD. And as always, if you have ideas about other events, activities, I'm completely open to your suggestions. This is our second year of having the conversation. We learned a lot last year and have put into place things that we've learned, but we're still learning. And my only goal is to make this conversation as useful to all of you as it can possibly be. So tonight's session is a particularly special event and a special part of our faculty series. We're honored to host Dr. Richard Milner. He is a professor of education at the University of Pittsburgh. There he also holds the Helen Faison Endowed Chair of Urban Education and is director of the Center of Urban Education. He is also the author of Racing to Class, our common reading for this year. We chose this book, Racing to Class, to provide the foundation for the second year of our community conversation because of how unabashedly it calls upon all of us as educators to confront issues of race and poverty. Dr. Milner rightly pulls no punches in telling us that neutrality itself is a form of action. When we remain silent, when we turn a blind eye, when we claim that these issues aren't relevant to the matters at hand, we are in reality supporting an often racist and unequal status quo. For those of you who were at graduation last year, you might also say we are committing a sin of omission. Addressing these challenges and engaging in conversations about race and poverty can be awkward, it can be uncomfortable, and at times it can be heartbreaking. But these conversations are absolutely necessary. The conversations we're having throughout this year are designed to better prepare our students to build more diverse schools and ensure that those schools are more successful because of their diversity and are truly inclusive. We are a professional school, and one of our core missions is to prepare students to be successful professionals in the field of education. Crucial to achieving that mission is better preparing our students to teach and support the education of students who live in poverty and students of color. Racing to Class provides a blueprint for that work. It demands that we recognize and talk openly and honestly about the pervasiveness of racism and inequity in our schools and in our society. It encourages us to explore the perspectives of others, to try to understand those who have had different experiences, and to be responsive to the often harsh realities of our students. It outlines organizational, curricular, and instructional strategies that both address the challenges facing students living in poverty and also calls upon the assets and strengths that these same students bring to their learning. It is a book that is at once both honest and critical, but also constructive. In short, the book speaks to those who find intolerable our failure to provide a quality education to all children and who are ready to do something about it. It speaks, in short, to all of you in this room. For that reason, I'm delighted that many of you had the opportunity to read and discuss the book, and I'm absolutely thrilled that we have the chance to dive in even deeper into these issues with the author himself, Dr. Milner. I'm also delighted that our own Natasha Waraku will serve as the evening's discussant. Natasha is an associate professor at the Ed School and an expert in the intersection of race, ethnicity, culture, and education. I can't think of anyone better equipped to lead tonight's discussion. To give you a sense of the flow of the event, Dr. Milner will speak for about 45 minutes, after which Natasha will join him on stage. She'll then pose some questions solicited in advance from the HGSE community, and then we'll open it up for an audience question and answer session ending at 5:30 p.m. One last note, I hope that many of you will also be able to attend our next Askwith Forum, which is this coming Monday, the 19th at 5:30 p.m. Bob Schwartz will lead a panel called Schooling in the Workplace, the Swiss Model. In the meantime, and for now, I hope you'll all join me in welcoming Dr. Richard Milner.
Good afternoon. Now, I'm from the South, so when I say good afternoon, I expect like call and response, right? How are y'all doing? I'm doing well. Thank you so much for the gracious introduction, Dean Ryan. I think we owe Dean Ryan an added round of applause before doing that, for his initiative in the fulfilling the promise of diversity throughout this academic year. Let's give Dean Ryan a hand. From my perspective, this is some of the most important work. The emphasis on issues of equity and justice is, I would say, is commendable, and I think other deans across the country can certainly learn from your lead and your leadership. But Harvard, right? This is the place that should be leading in conversations and leading in ways that might lead us all to a more equitable and just society. I also want to take this opportunity to acknowledge Jody Smith-Bennett for her graciousness and for all of her hard work in getting me here, and to Roger Falcon as well. Where's Roger? I know he's somewhere running around here. Let's give Roger and both Jody a hand for their work. Having moved into the role of administration as director of the Center for Urban Education at the University of Pittsburgh, I know now, unlike ever in the past, what it takes to put on these kinds of events. And so my hat goes off to you. I have so much I want to say to you, so I think I should get started here so that we're able to maximize our time. 3 framing questions here, and I draw your attention especially to the second question. How do we engage and address issues of race and poverty with humanity and courage? How do we address and engage issues of race and poverty with humanity and courage? And indeed, we are in this work together. I remember when I wrote Start Where You Are, and when I submitted my proposal to the Harvard Ed Press for consideration, I remember talking in the proposal explicitly about my desire to talk to teachers, to talk to educators, to talk to community members about issues germane to meeting the needs of all students. And when I submitted the first draft of Start Where You Are, I received line-by-line feedback from my editor, Doug Clayton. And for those of you who are writers in the room, you understand what it means when you get critical feedback on your writing, right? You kind of get a little sensitive about your stuff, right? And so Doug wrote back, and Doug had all of these critiques about the abstraction and the critique about the conceptual ways in which I was addressing issues for Start Where You Are. And I wrote back in my Vanderbilt way to him, and I just said very succinctly that I'm an academic, and this is how academics talk. And he wrote me back in about 2 sentences, and he said to me very clearly, he said, "I'm simply trying to get you to write the book you proposed. I'm simply trying to get you to speak to the audience with whom you said you wanted to speak." And it was one of those moments, you know, how we have the critical race theorists call it those CRT moments. It was one of those moments that I had to really stop and think. And it was from that point forward, Doug, that I decided to write in a way that really was consistent with who I say I am and what I believe in. So I thank you, Doug, for that. In Start Where You Are, I argue that we really don't have an achievement gap at all. Right? I know some of y'all are probably looking at me like, this dude is nuts. When is he leaving, headed back to Pittsburgh, right? And what I argue in that book is that our language matters. And I argue that what we really have is we have a teacher quality gap, and we have a teacher training gap, and we have an effective leadership gap, and you can say amen if you want to. And we have a challenging curriculum gap, and we have a school funding gap, and we have a digital divide gap, and we have a school counseling gap, and we have a wealth and income gap. We don't have an achievement gap. But what we have is we have an employment opportunity gap, and we have an affordable housing gap, and we have a healthcare gap, right? And we have a nutrition gap, right? We don't have an achievement gap. What we have is we have an instruction gap, and we have a school integration gap, and we have a quality childcare gap, and we have a school and pop culture gap. That's right, I said it. And we have what I argued in the book, an opportunity gap. Imagine if we reframed and we re-engaged the very ways in which we talk about the realities of what's happening to our students in our classroom, right? And I'm looking in the room across at you with these faces here. Harvard graduate students, you should be on the front lines of reimagining and rethinking the very ways in which we talk about the students with whom we serve. Until we penetrate and until we get at addressing these gaps, we're going to find ourselves in a holding pattern, right? We're going to find ourselves in a holding pattern. So I argue we really don't have an achievement gap and that we should really focus in and zone in on these areas, really drawing from the work of Jackie Irvine and others. Conceptually, in writing Racing to Class, these are some of the books I've read. Outstanding books. There's one book here by Tyrone Howard on why race and culture matter. Race and language. Here are some other examples there for you. This book here by Jason Irizarry, it actually focuses in on, there are actually Mexican-American student voices that are written from first person that sort of illustrate their experiences and the like related to issues of race and language. Regarding race and teaching, these are some of the books that sort of frame and shape the ways in which I think and will talk here today. From a structural perspective, here are a few books there. And from an interdisciplinary and multidisciplinary perspective, here are some additional pieces as well that you might find useful. And so in framing and thinking about the notion of race, it's important for us to be mindful that when you talk about race, you're not only talking about some physical construction, right? We know that race is socially constructed. We also know that race is legally constructed, historically constructed, and it's also physically constructed. Now, folks sometimes talk about race and racism, and it's sometimes unclear what we mean when we say racism. And so just to give you a running definition of what I mean by racism, here's an example of the ways in which I think and use race and racism in my work. I would draw your attention especially to issues of power, and also to issues of intentionality versus unintentionality, right? So what I've come to understand in my work with teachers or with educators is folks feel like they're not contributing to racist structures and systems, right? Because individually, they aren't intentionally engaging or being racist. But race and racism manifest and can manifest both at an unintentional level as well. So I recall when I was conducting a professional development session with some elementary school teachers, I recall a teacher saying to me the following. She said, "Our principal invited you here to talk to us about specific strategies to teach our poor children. I was devouring what you had to say. You were right on target until you got to this race stuff. Race has nothing to do with how to teach my kids living in poverty. What does it mean? Really? Right? And so what I recall is during that interaction is through my outstanding pedagogical skills, I was trying to bring her back to me, right? So she made this comment and she had every right to pose to pose the question and really to challenge what I was attempting to share. But what I noticed was that she began to doodle. And she doodled and really disengaged me for the remainder of the session, right? And I thought, wow, she has the power, right? The authority to be able to say, I'm going to shut you down because it makes me uncomfortable, right? But how many of our students in schools have that opportunity, right? To shut down things and to shut down opportunities that are oppressive and that are repressive to them, right? That's the question. So from a national data perspective, if you look at these data, they show you in-school suspension. On the left side, I give you a representation from the Office of Civil Rights. These data show you a snapshot of the demographics across the country, and then you look at in-school suspension rates there. Right? You get that sense? I want to move a little bit quickly through this because I have a lot to cover. If you look at outside of school suspension, and again, I include on the left side the racial demography. You see outside of school? You see it? Hey, y'all smile at me or something. Don't just look at me like I'm crazy, all right? All right. Expulsions. When you see this expulsion rate, your heart should race. Right? Proportionally. Right? So you might say, well, we're in Cambridge, right? That's the national profile, right? So what does it mean more locally? If you look at Boston, student data, in-school suspension there, proportionally. Why race? Why race? That's why. If you look at outside of school suspensions by race, why race? That's why. That's why. Expulsions. This is Boston. Right? Why race? That's why. In-school suspensions by race. Outside of school suspensions by race. Expulsions in Cambridge. Now, the end, to be fair, with expulsions is low, right? And so as I was pulling these data together, one of the points that one of my team members made was the end is low. But my point is every child matters. Every child matters in that classroom, right? Why race? That's why, right? That's what I want to tell that teacher who called me out, Dr. Lightfoot, right? That's what I want to tell her. Right? Free and reduced lunch. This is a national perspective. And then more locally. In the literature, we talk about this as disproportionality, right? That gives you a running definition of disproportionality there. Okay. And so now I want to talk more specifically about this notion of socioeconomic status. And so when you look at these data show you the poverty guidelines here. And these are taken from 2013. And I always use a family of 4 as my reference group. So if a family earns $23,551, that family is considered above the poverty line, right? And so we wonder why some families or why some students are failing or why some students are disengaged, right? When their families live below the poverty line or live close to the poverty line. So how do people succeed in society? How do people succeed in society? And what I want to talk now about is this notion of meritocracy. And meritocracy is the idea that people are rewarded based mostly or solely on their ability, their hard work, and their performance, right? So mindset one, all groups of people were born with the same opportunity, and if people just follow the law like a formula and work hard and put forth effort, then they would be successful. And then we have a nerve to give examples of folks who've done it. We say Oprah Winfrey did it, right? Didn't she grow up down there in Tennessee, right? And she's transcended poverty. Then why can't you? Why can't others, right? Mindset two. If people do not succeed, it is because they are not working hard enough, not because of other factors outside of their control. Voices of teachers. One teacher said, I get so sick of people, she was actually talking about me, making something out of nothing. My grandparents immigrated to this country with nothing, and they made something of their lives because they worked hard, right? But I am mindful of what curriculum theorist Beverly Gordon stated, and don't miss this. She says, it is difficult to critique the world and work to change it when the world works for you. Hello. Right? It's difficult to critique that thing and work to change it when the world works for you. Another teacher said, I'm going to be the kind of teacher who follows your advice, Dr. Milner, and have high expectations. If a student is not turning in his homework on time, I'm not going to give any slack. It's a 0 in my grade book. And she used it against me because I've been talking a lot, Dean Ryan, about having high expectations, right? So she used that against me, right? So implications for practice. On a classroom level, we know that factors far outside of merit give people their positions in society. From a sociological perspective, if the meritocracy argument were accurate, all positions would be awarded based on merit. If so, ability should predict who goes to college. Instead, say it, family income, right, is the best predictor. The more a family earns, the more likely their children are to go to college. While some people do get ahead through ability and hard work, others simply inherit wealth and the opportunities that go with it. In short, factors far beyond merit give people their positions in society. And so we can think broadly about what money brings, right? When I started working at Vanderbilt, I had a colleague who asked me to give him a ride to CarMax. He and his family were buying a new car at CarMax. So I was like, all right, cool, I'll give you a ride to CarMax. And as we were driving, my wife at the time was a State Farm agent. And I don't know if y'all know this, but State Farm does car loans. Did y'all know that? So as we were driving, I was trying to get my wife a car loan. I'm just going to put it out there, right? And so as we were driving, I was asking my colleague, I was asking about the interest rate. I was like, what kind of interest rate are you going to get on that thing? And I felt him frowning at me, like as I'm driving. And I'm like, man, if I'm being too personal, it's okay, right? And he was like, Rich, don't you know that cars depreciate as soon as you drive them off the lot? I was like, yep, I know that. He was like, we pay cash for our vehicles, right? And so here's a person who had been at the university just a few years longer than I, and we better be earning about the same amount of money, right? But he was able, right, to purchase a car, to purchase a fairly new car, because he had a trust fund, right? And he was able to go in and write a $20-something thousand check for it. Now, I'm not mad at him, but let's not pretend, right, like we're playing from an even playing field, right? How many of you baseball fans are in here? Any baseball fans here? Okay, it's like being born on third base and thinking you hit a triple, right? Hello, right? Some of us act like we are so outstanding and we are where we are because we've made all the right decisions, right? And things have just lined up for us because we are so exceptionally bright, right? But what I've come to understand in my life is that folks have opened doors for me, right? I'm a product of opportunity. And so when I look across this room at you graduate students, you folks who are the next cadre of professors and teachers and researchers and so forth, my heart is heavy, right? Because I realize, and my question to you is, what doors are you going to open for whom and when and how? And is that going to be a part of your being in your work moving forward? I'm going to come back to that question later. But what does money bring? I consult with one of the wealthiest schools in the state of Tennessee, and as a part of their curriculum, students start ACT and SAT prep in 7th grade, right? In 7th grade. And we have a nerve to compare their performance to students who have not received those kinds of opportunities, right? Let's just call it for what it is. It's not necessarily merit. Right? All right. So let's talk a bit about this notion race. Let's talk about race. And this is not a rhetorical question. Why is it so hard for us to engage the R word? What is it about the R word? What is it? Why can't we engage the R word? I'm practicing wait time. Yeah. What is it about race that makes it so tough? Yes.
Fear of being perceived as racist.
Okay, the fear of being received as racist. Okay, good. Did you say something, someone else?
Well, I was going to say that, but also just not knowing the language to use.
Okay, not knowing the language to use. Right? How do I qualify and substantiate my ways of being and knowing, right? And our experience is theory, right? The ways in which we live in our lives have to have validity, right? Okay, yes, jump in.
To piggyback off of being perceived racist, but actually realizing that you might be.
Right. What if I am racist? What might that mean and look like? And how do I move beyond feeling vilified in a space, right? Okay, how do I bounce back from something I've said? Absolutely. Is there one more? This side of the room is jamming, right? Yeah, jump in.
As a white person, I'm allowed not to.
Okay, right, and I love that, right? Because it reminds me, it takes me back to the place of when I was engaging the teacher, right? Who basically said, nope, I want to talk about poverty, and now you're talking about race, and I'm not going to engage it. Yep. All right. Yes, jump in.
Understanding that you lack respect.
That you what?
May lack respect.
May lack respect. Yeah, absolutely. Perspective. Okay. So experience and perspective. I got you. Yeah. All right. Let's say in the back there.
I'm thinking of race only on a personal level.
Yeah. Right. So race really doesn't matter. And besides, I have white friends. Right. I have friends outside of my racial and ethnic group. That's the thing that gets me, Dean Ryan. You know, folks will say, I can't be racist, right? Don't you know I have a friend outside, one friend, but I have, and we've had dinner together, right? Yeah. One more point.
To use my father's words, we have a black president, so we no longer have a race problem.
Right. We are post-racial. Don't you know it, Rich Milner? Can you move on, right? Okay. All right. Yeah. So some of us adopt. Sounds like maybe your dad and others adopt the colorblind positions and orientations to the work. Mindset 1, if I acknowledge the racial or ethnic background of my students or myself, then I may be considered racist, right? I didn't plant anybody in the audience, did I? Right? That showed up, that emerged, I think, right? Mindset 2, if I admit that people experience and see the world differently, I may be seen as politically incorrect. I may offend others, students, and so forth, if I express my reservations, my beliefs and reservations about race, or reservation about race. Mindset 3, I should treat all my students the same, regardless of who they are, what their experiences are, or what their experiences or their home situations are, or what their experiences related to race happen to be. But we know on a classroom level that race matters, and that we need to, of course, reject these colorblind ideologies on an individual level, but also on a structural and a systemic level, right? And so adopting colorblind ideologies it makes it difficult for us to understand and to recognize there's an overrepresentation of students of color in special education. There's an underrepresentation of students of color in gifted education. You know, we always go back to Brown, you know, having conversations about Brown. And what we know is, you know, post-Brown, post-DSEG, all of a sudden the little white kids became gifted, right? We decided in order to maintain multiple school sites, we decided that we were going to come up with this tiering system, and all the little white kids are gifted, and the little black and brown children are just, in these quote-unquote regular classrooms. We also don't recognize that there's an over-referral of black students to the office, and that black and brown students are being, as you've seen in the data, are experiencing expulsion and suspension rates at very high and alarming rates. And we say, surely it's the students themselves, right? And not our racist and classist, right, policies and procedures, right? And centering students. I want to talk now about a case study that's in the book. How many of y'all have read the book? Look at y'all. Look at that. All right. Case study 5. And I need you to hang with me because I have a limited amount of time. I need you to hang with me. And I tend to give too many details if I feel like you aren't getting it. So you better smile at me. I'm going to just keep repeating the same things over and over. That's what good teachers do, though, right? Good teachers want to make sure folks are with you, right? All right, so as I'm giving these, as I'm talking about the robbery, I want you to really hang with me because I tend to give too many details, or details you don't necessarily need. All right, so when I was conducting research for Start Where You Are, there was a robbery that was committed by high school students, okay? And the high school school was a feeder school to this middle school. All right, so y'all with me? So it wasn't the middle school students who committed the robbery, but they were high school students. I was conducting research in a middle school. So far, so good. All right, so it was the neighborhood school where the students stopped to get the Doritos and now laters. What else do kids buy? The students buy these days when they're walking to hot chips, right? So it was that store, right? It was that store. And it was a mom and pop shop. There was a Chinese couple that ran the store in the community, and one of the a high school student shot and killed the store clerk. So this happened like on a Thursday, and I was scheduled to be back in the school for observations the following week. And so when I drove up on the yard and eavesdropped on the bus yard, guess what the students were talking about, even several days later? The robbery, right? They were still engaged in the robbery, and they were posing questions like, "I wonder where they got the gun. I wonder how much time they're going to get," right? And so the first period, when I did observations, nothing. Second period, nothing. No mention of the robbery, no curriculum alignment. Third period, nothing. Fourth period, when I went to the cafeteria, students still engaged in the robbery, right? So as a part of my reciprocity for the work I was doing in the school, that's right, graduate students, reciprocity, right, giving back to the communities that serve you. Hello, right? I conducted professional development with the teachers. And so the following week, I was scheduled to I did a professional development with the teachers. And when I tell you, so I just started the PD session by saying, "Hey guys, I'm just wondering why you didn't engage the robbery in some way." And when I tell you the people in that room ganged up on me, like one after the other, they gave me reason after reason why it was completely inappropriate for them to engage, have conversations about, build a curriculum around the robbery, right? What do you think what are some of the things you think I may have heard? Anybody? What do you think?
It's not a second you don't talk about that.
Right, I have to teach a real curriculum, Rich Milner, right? How dare you come in and suggest, right? Go back to the university, okay? What else do you think I heard? They're too young. These are middle schoolers. Yep, absolutely. Jump in. You were going to say that? Okay. I'm waiting on that one piece of feedback. And yeah.
They're already surrounded by it. It's already
Right. Why would we glorify romanticize race, right? Violence. Anybody else? Is there another person?
You would encourage other students to do it?
Yep, got that. Right. But when a teacher said to me, "And the robbery won't show up on the test," like real talk. The other teachers almost in unison said, "Yeah," right? Now I don't mean to be overly critical of teachers because they are operating in systems, right? That we teach to. Oh, sorry. See, you all right? Okay. All right. There we go. All right, good stuff. But so I don't mean to be overly critical of teachers. That's not the idea here, right? But the idea that the teachers found it completely inappropriate to engage the race, although the students were thinking and talking about it, is, of course, from my perspective, problematic. And then there was a guy who, if I set my computer up on the right side of the classroom during PD, he sat on the left side of the classroom with his arms folded, right? If I set my computer up on the left side of the library, he sat on the right side of the library as far away from me as possible with his arms folded. And he raised his hand. Like, the entire time I was in the school doing professional development and so forth, he never had one conversation. He never said one word to me, right? And on this day, he raised his hand, and I was thinking, come with it, because I ain't scared, right? And he said, and furthermore, I teach math and science. What in the world does a robbery have to do with my teaching math and science, right? And so I said, well, and I had to take responsibility, right? Because I had been talking about culture and teaching and so forth. I said, well, I gave some examples. I said, what if you pulled up, and where are my math folks? Don't be too critical. Where are the math people? Don't be too critical of these examples I'm giving, right? I'm an ELA guy. So, all right, so I said, what if you pulled up Google Maps and you had the students guesstimate the amount of time it take for the responders to get from the police precinct, let's say, to the robbery site. There's some math in that, right? Driving various rates of speed. You get me? Where's the math person? I said, is that okay? That sounds decent, all right? Maybe not high level, but there's some math in that, right? I said, but what if you went a little bit deeper, right? And the math teacher actually had a conversation with the social studies teacher. Imagine that. And the social studies teacher, imagine if they had a chance to talk to each other. And the social studies teacher posed questions about gentrification and posed questions about geography of opportunity, right? And the students then engaged in some research projects where they looked at the relationship between gun shops or access to gun shops in particular communities and crime, right? There's some social studies and math in that, right? Or access to liquor stores and crime. There's some math in that as well. And I said, imagine if the social studies teacher, the math teacher, also had a conversation with the ELA teacher. And the ELA teachers had students develop a letter to the police precinct, right? To say, here are the issues we found in our community. And here are our recommendations about how we might be able to address or to redress some of the issues, right? There's some ELA in writing, right? Right, there's some ELA in writing. But what was most telling about my experience regarding this robbery was that the students, from what I came to understand, were grieving, right? They were grieving. Now, I don't like to use words like trauma because that's not what I do. I read about trauma, but I don't know about trauma to that degree. But I do have a good sense of what grief is. And you know how I know they were grieving? Because in my conversations with them in the cafeteria, they made it clear. The assumption was that they were grieving because of the shooters, the people who committed the crime. But they were grieving because many of them had developed relationships with the store clerks, right? But in black and brown schools, in schools where students live below the poverty line, we say they'll get through it. We even have a name for it in the literature. We call it resilience. Shame on us. Shame on us. Your grown self, when you're grieving, when you're going through challenging situations, don't you need mechanisms and structures to be able to work through those challenging situations? But we just expect students, our black and brown students, to just deal with it, to get up and to just move forward and to just move on. Shame on us. Shame on us. And then we hear people say, well, we don't have money, we don't have the funds to have more guidance counselors and social workers and psychologists and so forth in our schools. And my response is simple. Yet we can build more prisons. You know? Yet we can build more prisons. It's a moral imperative that we reshape and we rethink the ways in which we engage our youth. And it's raced. When Jeff Duncan Andrade was here a few years ago and he did a lecture, he and his research team, they looked at data and they looked at Columbine, and they found that students in Columbine are still receiving counseling and psychological services, right? For those students. And you know what? They should be. But for our children, we say they've just got to bounce back. They've just got to bounce back. And so when students walk into the classroom and tell you to kiss their ass, that's right, I said it. Then it puts you in a place where you want, and the first thing teachers say is out. Get your stuff and get out. That's what we say in our schools. Rather than looking at and figuring out ways to support our students to be and to maximize their capacity. I know I'm right about it. About 1 in 5 schools across the country doesn't have a guidance counselor. About 1 in 5 schools doesn't have a guidance counselor. And I got to move a lot faster. I got carried away there. All right, so the curriculum, now I want to talk just a bit about this notion of curriculum, and I'm drawing from the work of Elliot Eisner here. And Eisner says that the curriculum operates on 3 levels. It's explicit. We know the explicit curriculum. We know we're teaching it. It's intentional. It shows up through the standards. It shows up on websites and the like. We also teach an implicit curriculum. You know this. Sometimes it's hidden. It's sometimes implicit, right? But we're teaching an implicit curriculum as well. But there's also, and this is the most fascinating form of the curriculum, is the null curriculum. And the null curriculum is what we don't teach in schools. What we don't teach in school. So imagine the learning opportunities embedded in what students are not exposed to regarding the robbery. What lessons are they learning, right? The same thing is true for small children. Like for young children, I was in a classroom. You think about, so when in a kindergarten classroom, Jamie comes in with his mother. And Jamie and the student in the class says, "Hi," this is kindergarten class. When the student says, "Hey, Jamie's mommy has on a red shirt," and the teacher picks that up as a good teacher should and says, "That's right. And we talked about the color red." Good, you're good. I like that. Red yesterday, and red starts with the letter. All right, and then the next day, Jamie comes in with his 2 mommies, right? And on this day, when Jamie comes in with his 2 mommies, and the student says, "Wait a minute, I have a mommy and a daddy. You have 2 mommies." And the teacher says, No. We're not going to talk about that. What messages are embedded in the implicit curriculum when we avoid conversations, even with young children, about sexuality, right? In a similar way, when we avoid conversations, that's right, I'm saying it, about black and brown bodies, right, that are unfairly shot down, arguably, and killed. What message are we sending to our students when our students see themselves intricately tied and aligned and linked to these bodies? And the response of teachers is, "I've got to teach a real curriculum." Let me tell you something. This is the real curriculum. This is the real curriculum. The real curriculum is the text and the texts, right, that students are experiencing on a daily basis, right? And so because I live in a black body, right, I have to be, my dad called me about, my dad is he drove a forklift for many years, and then then he became a janitor, right? And my dad doesn't mince words. He says what he has to say, and then he hangs up on you, right? He's like, "Are we still having a conversation?" I guess not. He hung up on me, right? So, and he called me a couple of months ago, and he said to me, he said, "Rich, you're up there." He thinks Pittsburgh is the real city, right? They're down in Georgia, but he thinks Pittsburgh is like the big city, right? So he called. And he's like, Rich, you up there driving around in that big city, and he said, I want you to be careful. He said, because those cops and stuff are up there following you around, and he was like, you're gonna bury me. I'm not gonna bury you, right? And it was at that, and then he hung up, right? Then he hung up. And it was at that moment that I'm reminded that even as a 40-something-year-old, don't I look good for 40-something-year-old? As a 40-something-year-old man, my dad cares for me in a way, and he has to, and he reflects about my being in a way, in a very different way. So my colleagues at the university can intellectualize what's happening with Michael Brown and others. For me, and for parents, and for other black and brown parents, it takes on a whole new level of what the curriculum means and should mean. And guess what? For your students, they are grappling with and dealing with these situations as well, but we teach them through the no curriculum something that says it doesn't matter. I got to move a lot faster. Lot faster. One student said in my research, he said, the shit gets old. The shit gets on my nerves. These damn white people follow me around the store like I'm going to steal the clothes off their backs. The white boys are in the store and nobody's checking them. It's the brothers they're following around, The shit gets old. I'm sorry I'm cussing so much, but I'm just honoring their voices, right? I'm sick of it. I've been working since I was 12 and saving. I can buy whatever I want in those stores. But it's because I'm a brother, they're checking every move I make. A female student put it to me like this. She said, and you know how you're doing interviews, Natasha, and you're supposed to pose the question and sit back. But when this student was responding, I almost got up and gave her a high five, right? Because this resonates with me even today. The student said, it's like whenever I say something in class, the teacher is like, well, that's interesting. But when a white student says the same thing or makes the same point, she's like, that's a great point. And I'm thinking, that's exactly what I just said, right? She always does that. So I just stopped talking, participating in class. And so what we've come to understand is that students are experiencing what's known as racial microaggressions, right? Yes, I know I'm right about it. And racial microaggressions are these brief and commonplace daily verbal, behavioral, or environmental indignities, whether intentional or unintentional, that communicate hostile, derogatory, and negative racial slights and insults towards people of color. And what happens is students who are experiencing these racial microaggressions, sometimes they default to or they move to spaces where they don't participate. It becomes taxing. Fannie Lou Hamer said, I'm sick and tired of being sick and tired, right? And so they start to experience this racial battle fatigue, right? And I try to articulate to my colleagues what I'm experiencing or what students are experiencing. And it's very difficult sometimes for them to understand. And then that also leaves me wondering, like, wow, when are things going to get better? Even as an endowed chair, right? So, serving students of color. What I'm going to do now is I want to turn there and talk about some recommendations. And what you will see here is the longer I'm in this work, Dr. Lightfoot, people are trying to move me to a macro. Like my heart, though, all day long is micro. I care deeply about working with teachers. My bet is on teachers. Who's going back into the classroom? Raise your hand if you're going back in the classroom. I am relying on you. I believe our best bet is for teachers who are in classrooms, and you can do it. We need you. We really need you. So what you're going to see here is a clip from potential teachers who are working in a school, and this is sort of midway through the semester. And what we're documenting is we're trying to improve, of course, the ways in which we are educating them, But if I had more time, I'd show you an earlier video clip where they were talking, and really all of the emphases were placed on students and their families. The families don't care. The students come in and they're not motivated. All of this, right? Ways in which people who don't know better are engaging and thinking about our students. There's another big lesson here as well, and that is who's participating in the discourse. There are community members there who are teaching and learning. So you'll see them, and students are also teaching and learning as well. And I want you to listen to how they're framing and talking about what's happening to students, even in 2015. All right. So as you see there, even in 2015, we're grappling with some of the same challenges and some of the same situations that we've been talking about for so long. In terms of moving the subjective into the objective, we've also, in terms of meeting the needs of students, and particularly children of color, what the research shows is this. The research shows that students of color are referred to the office for what's known as objective infractions, and white students are referred to the office. Students of color are referred to the office for what's known as subjective infractions, and white students are referred to the office for what's known as objective ones, right? So, for black and brown students, you're too loud, or you're being disrespectful. Russ Giebel and his research team looked at thousands of disciplinary referrals, and what he found was that overwhelmingly students of color are being sent out for being rude or for being disrespectful. No, white students are being sent out because, let's say class starts at 5 o'clock and you arrive at 5:05. I look at my digital clock, right? You're late, right? So we've got to recognize that. We've also got to shift and talk about assets versus deficits. If you look at this example, Carla, a high school student who is working 6 to 8 hours a week, or 6 to 8 hours a day after school at a fast food restaurant that helps support her family. She passes all of her classes and shows up at school every day, but her schoolwork is not exceptional. A teacher's deficit perspective, poor Carla, she works too many hours. Although she passes my class, she could do so much better if she spent more time studying and less time working. Her schoolwork could be better. But a teacher's asset perspective, Carla demonstrates the capacity to balance her schoolwork and her part-time job. I should talk with her about how I can assist her to make sure she is maximizing the class while she is working so hard in her part-time job. This balancing act between school and work is commendable. You see how the lens shifts there? And so, with no apologies to Oscar Lewis or Ruby Payne, there is no culture of poverty. There is no culture of poverty. And moreover, race is not a disability, and poverty is not a disability. In terms of recommendations, here's a list here. The one big one that or two or three I'll focus on here. One is we've got to increase the number of adults in every classroom. What I found when I traveled across the country is when there are multiple adults in every classroom, for instance, a lead teacher, an assistant teacher, a counselor, a social worker, a community member, that provides the kind of synergy, if you will, that allows teachers to teach. What we know for sure is that students succeed when the social is addressed and attended to. We've got to radically reform in-school suspension as well. If we're going to continue sending our babies, our black and brown bodies outside of school, we've got to move beyond these prison-like environments that really reify what we expect or what some expect from our students, right? We've got to build racial and ethnic identity among our students, right? There's compelling empirical research. Jay Hughley, who is a professor at Pitt, who actually graduated from the Harvard Graduate School, he is showing in his research the link between strong academic achievement and strong racial and ethnic identity. That is, if I feel strongly about my own racial and ethnic identity, I tend to do better, right? My conjecture is, or maybe it's a conspiracy theory, that the reason white students are doing well on academic measures is because they feel so strongly about their own racial and ethnic identity, right? They're taught that they're exceptional. They're told at a very, very young age that white is right, right? Some other examples here. Although my colleagues here might completely disagree with the recommendation of reducing class size, what I've come to understand, because we don't see strong increases in quote-unquote outcomes, what I've come to understand for what's known in the literature as school-dependent students, though reducing class size can be the difference maker for students. You talk students off the ledge sometimes when there are fewer students for teachers to have to address. And so I conclude with this, and I'm going to put it very succinctly. Some students, ladies and gentlemen, will succeed because of you, and some students are going to succeed in spite of you. Thank you so much for the opportunity to be here. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Rich, for that really, really compelling and engaging talk. We've solicited questions from our community beyond this room, and I think in the interest of time, maybe I'll pose one question. I might pose one of my own, and then I'll open it up. So start thinking about your questions, and then we'll invite you up in a few minutes. One of the questions that somebody sent in to us was about thinking about this work outside of urban communities. So how do we think about this work specifically for more homogeneous populations, whether it's a kind of white rural populations or suburban, predominantly white populations, but how do you think about how one does this work, the importance of this work in those communities? And if we also think about those graduates going on to be our teachers who are predominantly white, how this matters.
Are you able to hear me? Can't hear me. But there you go. So one of the points I think is important for us to remember is white as a race, right? So when we have conversations about race, we often default to this notion that we're talking about brown folk, or we're talking about yellow folk, right? But the reality is white is a race, and if we're serious about engaging and propelling conversations outside of our classroom environments, our school environments, and so forth, we've got to engage issues of whiteness. What does it mean to be white, right? I had someone ask me, she said, I'm really, torn. I'm offended that, are you saying that, are you saying that white students shouldn't develop pride, or that white students shouldn't? And, my point was not that white students should feel inferior, but white students need to have a clear sense about their history, and white students need to have and about oppression in the ways in which their whiteness, right? Whiteness shows up and manifests in very different ways than white, right? Mm-hmm. So understanding whiteness. Cheryl Harris wrote that compelling. How many of y'all read Whiteness as Property, all right? You got to read Cheryl Harris's piece on whiteness as property. So understanding whiteness is essential. I think. And so in these homogenous environments, having conversations about race is still essential, right? Because we know increasingly we're living in a diverse society, and from a race perspective, preparing students for that work outside of their sort of homogenous safe space, I think, is essential.
Thanks. So something that I've been thinking about since yesterday as I've thought about this forum and revisiting your book is the Black Lives Matter movement. And I'm wondering how you, and I think for many people, that movement, along with Ta-Nehisi Coates' work, he just got the MacArthur Genius Award, and there's, he's being recognized for his work writing about racism and what it means to be, what you talked about in terms of racialization affecting your body and your sense of self and the way you walk in the world in a very different way. And I think it's sort of created this sense among, especially among whites in the United States, like, of understanding that wasn't there before. Like, it sort of, brought this on the stage in a way that I think wasn't there. So my question for you is, do you think that this is a moment in which this work is this going to help propel this kind of work that you're talking about forward? And what does this mean for education and dealing with race in education?
I think it's critically important that we recognize the fact that we're making strides. We are moving forward, I think, in most ways, in the right direction. The Black Lives Movement, I think, does help sort of propel and situate conversations in ways that they may not have previously. But, from a Freudian perspective, I realize talk and discourse is powerful. And some would argue that talk, of course, is action. But doggone it, can I say doggone it?
You can say whatever you want.
I want us to move beyond these framed conversations, right? Can we do more than talk?
Yeah.
Right? What does it mean to live this work? Right? That's the question. How do we take up these issues related to race and equity and use the Black Lives Movement as a space to propel actions, right? And how we think about policies like affirmative action, or how we think about policies like zero tolerance, let's say on a micro level in schools, right? How do we use the ways in which we re-engage conversations about race, or the ways in which we use the Black Lives Movement to propel what we do, right? And so I'm around liberal, white, very supportive colleagues often, and they come and they pose questions to me, and sometimes I find myself wanting to say, I ain't having no more conversations with you about this, right? I want you to live what you know to be true and what you know to be appropriate in disrupting the status quo. So, having conversations, I think, is great. I hope the book has been a vehicle to engage in some really powerful conversations. But let's move beyond the conversations. And it's really about a mindset. It's a being. It's a way of. Engaging in justice work and in social justice work. It becomes who you are, and it shows up in those meetings, right? When you have the opportunity to provide opportunities for other folks, right?
Yeah, great, thank you. So this is a question that someone sent in, and the person asked about innovation and organizations experimenting with how to improve education for Black and brown children, and how all of these sort of new charter schools and new ways of doing things are often, Black and brown children are often used as sites for experimentation. I think one of the big things that has come out of this work is the no excuses schools, for example. What's your sort of take on this, and how do we empower those communities to be stronger actors in making decisions about what happens in their communities and education in particular?
Yeah, the first thing, people will ask me, can you give me an example of a school or a district that has made serious strides, let's say, in education or a particular domain. And I'm very, very careful about doing that, because the reality is we're dealing with nuances and idiosyncrasies that that we've got to be responsive to the particular, right? And so we can learn some things that are transferable across various contexts, but I think we've got to be very careful about getting on the bandwagon of whatever the new, latest, and greatest innovation we think happens to be. Teachers are working in very complex systems, and with leadership, let's say with superintendents turning over every 2 years or every 3 years, it makes it very difficult for teachers to buy in and for us to really know with all these innovations. I'm far beyond this notion that we don't know what to do to be successful with our students, right? I'm far beyond it. I think we are just in a place where we're not willing to do what's necessary to meet the needs of our students. I mean, this, and I don't mean this to sound patronizing, but this is not rocket science, right? We know that we shouldn't be racist, right? We know, right? This is not like, we know that we need to be more intentional, right, about the kinds of hiring practices we implement among teachers, right? That they need support when they get in the classroom, right? That they need to develop instructional and pedagogical skills to be able to meet the needs and be responsive to everybody in that classroom, right? So we know these kinds of things, yet we don't do it. I think we need to be very innovative about making sure we get leadership and people who are committed to staying in a space for a while. And I know we can't force people to stay in a place for it, but we need people who are going to, we need superintendents who are going to stay the course and who are going to allow, even with failure, right? Allow us to make some mistakes and to really build a robust knowledge base about what might work in a particular place. But I suspect, especially in our communities, where the turnover is unfortunately out of control, we'll probably find ourselves with all these innovations and the new innovation that comes in with the superintendent will remain until he or she transitions, right? And then we're on to the next one. You can't make real shifts and changes with that type with those types of practices.
So if we know what works, what gets in the way?
Now that's a good question. What gets in the way? I think our ego gets in the way sometimes. I think, especially for university professors, right? Hence I don't mean that I'm a professor, so I can say that, right? So
you can say whatever you want.
So I'm trying not to get in trouble here, but I think sometimes our ego gets in the way. The same thing's true about, I'm a teacher educator, and that's where I spend my life. I've spent my life trying to figure out how to improve teacher education. But my mentors across the country are like, you're so much smarter than that. You're so much better. Is that where you really want to engage and spend your intellectual energy, right? And so I think we as individuals, we sometimes get in the way of, we allow our egos to make us again believe that we are where we are because we've been so outstanding, right? What else gets in the way? I think structures and systems get in the way, right? Because they are, the educational system was not designed for Black and brown folks, right? And so making shifts to disrupt what we know to be so, or what we've come to know, it requires change. It requires huge shifts in our very core, right? In the very core of who we are and how we experience the world. And in some ways, what we're asking people to do is to really step back and to question and critique the people we're closest to. So, it's hard for me to reflect about my grandfather who thought all white people were racist. He'd be like, those white folks, right? And I'd be like, all white people, granddaddy? And indeed, he meant just about all white people, right? So disrupting that and disrupting those spaces that are comfortable for us, I think is what gets in the way. Yeah, you threw one at me there. That was good.
Didn't tell you
That was
about
good.
that.
I like that one. I like that one.
So I want to open it up. If you have a question, just come up to the microphones and we'll just make 2 lines here. And I just want to remind, as people are lining up, all of you to be brief. I've been told very explicitly to make sure nobody goes over speaks for a long time. So please keep your question brief so that we have time for a long conversation. I saw a lot of hands. Whoever had your hand up, just come up to the microphones. Go ahead.
Okay.
And sorry, when you just introduce yourself and let us know who you are and.
Yeah, I'm Alma Babbio. I am a first year here at Harvard College, and I recently just graduated from Pittsburgh Public Schools. And so when you were talking about Perry and everything like that, I was like, this is what I know, this is my experience. And one thing that I thought was missing from what you're talking about is the student's perspective, and making sure that students are a part of these changes that's happening, because all the things that are happening is going to happen to them. And as a student, as a former student of Pittsburgh, there's many students that are ready and willing and capable of taking on this work, but often there's not enough spaces for them to make sure they make these changes. So how do we make sure we foster those spaces for these students so they can be a part of this movement? Because it cannot be done just with adults sitting down saying this is what students should do, but students should definitely have a voice in what happens to them.
No, I think, no, I couldn't agree with you more. And as a part of the work we're doing with the project Ready to Learn, is we're really listening intently to those students, to students with whom we're working. I think the another important component to this is we find ourselves in a situation not only where the superintendents are changing, but also principals are shifting, right? And teachers are leaving mid-year, and so it is a very it's a complex situation that students find themselves, right? Because what we know is that when mechanisms are in place to support them, they succeed. But we are finding ourselves really struggling to provide spaces where they draw from the many assets they bring, right? And because they've bought into, for many of them, they bought into this narrative that they're inferior. They bought into this narrative that somehow they deserve, and they don't use this language, right? But somehow they deserve inadequate resources in 2015, right? When I showed the clip earlier, you can imagine who the students are that our undergraduate students were referring to. They're folks in black and brown bodies. They're students who live below the poverty line, right? And so, and what's potentially powerful about what we're trying to do in this program is we are really engaging community members. And so community members then are able to use what we're sharing, what students are sharing and so forth, and really speak to broader systems, the school board, having conversations on councils to support, right? And not only vilify or criticize learning opportunities for our students. In Pittsburgh, what I can say for sure is with the philanthropy there, with there is some of the greatest healthcare facilities in the country. We have some of the best educational institutions there in the world. It is really a ripe space for excellence, right? And if we can, I truly believe with the school system of 30-something thousand students, we can do it in Pittsburgh, right? I really do believe we can do it. So I remain hopeful. I do. Thank you for your comment.
There's a question over here.
Thank you so much, Dr. Milner. My name is Susie Byers, and I'm a master's student. I especially loved so many exclamation points in your book. I could feel the urgency, and it was really inspiring. My question is about the notion of fair isn't equal with funding, and you touched on that a bit, but I was hoping you can give us some practical advice for how we can advocate for more funding to those disadvantaged students.
Yeah, I think that helping policymakers, school board members understand that that when we provide equitable funding for students. That's our best shot at addressing and increasing achievement among our students. But what we know also from the research literature is clear that moving money around or increasing financial support without research-based, clear links to how monies are going to be used could actually, we could find ourselves actually not, I wouldn't say do more harm than good, but we might find ourselves not making the advancements that we might want. So I think, again, using your voice, getting student voices and providing concrete examples to help, some community members have no clue. They can't even imagine being in a classroom where there are too few seats in a classroom, right? Are you kidding me? Right? So, but in a very concrete way, helping community members, school board members, and so forth understand that we're still grappling with these types of challenges, I think, is important.
Hi, my name is Sarah, and I'm a graduate student, and I just wanted to thank you for such a compelling and frank talk. I have a question for those of us who are going into higher education. How can your work be applied in that context, especially for our students, our Black and brown students who make it and those who don't make it?
Yeah, so you're talking about higher ed in terms of building. I think we need to have, from a research perspective, I think we need to have deeper conversations. We need to build and talk across the research literature and so forth. In listening to some of Natasha's work about her upcoming book, it's compelling work that I think knowing and having a sense of what some of those voices and some of those perspectives are from students once they get to college tell us something about what we're doing in pre-K through 12. But we are not doing a great job of talking across in between the literature basis. So I definitely think we need to do a better job of that. Yeah.
So we have time for one more question. There's
Hi, I'm Rick Porteous. I only have an undergraduate degree from here, but I'm an Askwith groupie.
Thank you for being
the
here.
nephew of a former UPitt dean, so go Pitt.
Go Pitt.
I've been the lead founder of an independent charter school that's been nationally recognized, and I'm working on another one here in New Bedford. And I've come to the realization that the most powerful thing you can say to a young person is that you are needed, and that there are issues of equity, economic, and environmental sustainability that must be solved within the lifetime of our students. But my question is the sort of Prussian structure of our school day and everyone's expectations at what school should look like and feel like interfere with the students really engaging seamlessly with the community to work on these problems in a real way. And I'm wondering if you have any thoughts on how to sort of dissolve that self-imposed barrier, despite what school committees expect and teachers just assume. Thanks.
Yeah. So one of the first things I want to say is that I think we need to get back to the spirit of the charter, right? And the spirit of the charter really is about providing innovation and providing alternatives for students whose needs may be undermet, and just saying a traditional public school. We know charter schools are public schools. And I think we've lost some of that in the push for with per pupil spending and so forth, and wanting to make sure we link monies to quote unquote achievement scores and so forth. Imagine if we were able to really be innovative and to step outside of our boxes, if you will, related to what we do in schools to build not only their academic development, but also their social development, I think are where we should be. And if we could move to a space where students feel like they're heard. Students, there are mechanisms and systems in place to allow, and that we're really listening and we really care about student contributions to structures, but also we see students as teachers, as folks who come in, and the teachers are not the only arbiters of knowledge, right? So really reshaping and reframing the ways in which we do schools, and in some ways, I think the charter school movement could be the place to do it if we're bold enough, right, to say, come hell or high water, we're going to do what we know to be right. So we're going to do what we know that's necessary, and I suspect what we'll find is even if state monies don't follow, if district monies don't follow, your ability to demonstrate your capacity beyond the ordinary philanthropic support will probably follow. So I'm hoping that's where we'll be able to go and move.
So I want to thank all of you for joining us tonight, and I want to especially thank Rich Milner for such a really provocative and engaging discussion and to being part of this Fulfilling the Promise of Diversity series. Thank you very much.
Thank you.